Forests and deserts are very different places. My literacy center is going to be based on soil, pretty much, and growing plants. I love plants, so I love to teach about plants. And so I have chosen first grade, and I think that my literacy center will be a very cool place for students to come and enjoy learning about plants. I would have all kinds of fun activities for them to do in my literacy center, but also I would fill it full of books about plants that live here in the Blue Ridge Mountains and plants that live in the desert. I think that it's important that students understand the difference between the desert, which is hot, dry, and sandy, or even rocky. And I think that it's important for students to understand that the Blue Ridge Mountains, we are cold, wet, insect-infested, mossy, grassy, leafy area. And that plants grow best in these environments because they have adapted themselves to their environments. And so today I'm going to be showing you kind of some of the things that I'll have in my literacy center that I think will be a very fun and creative aspect to my classroom. And I am excited to show you some of the books that I have selected for my literacy center to have. So for the first, I'm going to talk about the desert. So for the desert, I have my painting right here, and it kind of is just representing the difference. So in a desert, it's sandy, the rock, it's rocky, there's cactus, there's animals, there's all kinds of really cool creatures and plants in the desert. So I have selected 7 books for my literacy center for the desert side. And a fun activity that I would include would be like a sandbox. And I would even have some real succulents and cactuses, but obviously those succulents and cactuses will be dry, and we would explain how they live here because of the sunlight beaming down on them is hot. But those are some activities that I think would be really fun. I do have one activity that I'm going to explain at the end of my video that's just going to like help them understand the difference in cactus versus Christmas trees, pine trees, and that kind of thing. So let's get back to the desert. So with the desert, I have chosen 7 books. One of the books that I really liked and that I wanted to make very known is this book. It is a nonfiction informational book, and I really enjoyed reading this book. I actually read this book to some of my boys in the classroom yesterday, and they really enjoyed it. So this book just shows you all the different animals, and it just shows you all the different animals and the plants. So like as you can see, like here's some plants and animals, and they're learning all kinds of things through this book about the desert. One of the main things this book is actually about is how dry and hot the desert is, and it even talks about how cactus have to absorb the water when it does rain, and they store it within their leaves and their trunks so that they can live in the hot, dry environment. And so I thought that this book was really interesting, but I'm also going to just show you some of the other examples of books that I have. So I have this nonfiction book, but I also have this really fun like storybook fiction, maybe even informational fiction, and it just is talking about this little boy who's traveling in the desert and what he comes to see, and it really shows you like the different animals and all of that really cool, fun stuff. So I have this book. I also have another book just that's about the desert. This book I thought was very interesting. It doesn't necessarily talk about the it talks about the plants and the animals, but it mainly talks about the biome of a desert. So I thought that would be a really fun one to incorporate in my literacy center, just so that they can understand. And we would obviously go through all of these books eventually through the year. This book is really cool. This is a desert scrapbook, and it is just a book about these people that go traveling, and they scrapbook and they journal what they see in the desert. It talks about plants, it talks about the environment, it talks about the temperatures, it talks about all the animals, the snakes, the rats, the everything. The other two books that I wanted to add were these two. So I just have this book, and it also talks about this very specific, the Sarago cactus, and it's just one of the most famous cactus. So I also wanted to just like show that I do have specific books about certain cactus. And then we also just have this one. And my students actually really liked this book as well. It goes through and talks about the environment and all of that fun stuff. So, next I'm going to discuss the mountain region. So, in the mountains, obviously, we have forests, and Christmas trees grow here because the soil is so moist, it's insecty. We fertilize the trees, we make sure that they're in good, rich, red and brown soil and dirt, and all of the logs and the leaves, they decompose, and they just make the ground rich and beautiful. So I have chosen to do this. So a couple of the books that I have are mainly about forests, but I do have a book about fir trees. So the one book that I thought was super interesting and that I will definitely keep in my literacy center for this specific, it's called A Log's Life. And it just talks about how when trees fall, like animals live in these logs, and as they decompose, they're enriching the soil in the forest to help trees and animals live, pretty much. And it's a really cool and inspiring book that I plan on having always in my literacy center. So, like, as you can see, like, it just shows you, like, the different types of plants, and it talks about like leaves and moss and all kinds of animals that live in the forest as well. And so I have chosen this book to share. I also have these 4 books, and they have like this one talks about forests, and it actually talks about all the trees that you'll see in the forest. This one talks about all the insects and what makes the soil good. This one obviously talks about animals and trees and leaves and the soil. This one actually does talk about soil and the life of the trees. This one talks about the habitats, so bears climb in the trees and they sleep and all of that fun stuff, and we also have back to that book. So obviously the soils are very different in the desert versus the forest. And so that's my main goal. I want to incorporate buckets of soil that we find in this region, and I want to put sand, and I want the students to understand that the soil here is very different than the desert. So when you plant a cactus here, it's not going to live, just as if you plant a Christmas tree in the desert, it's not going to live. And an activity that I have created for my students to do is I actually have little cards, okay? And they have all these different plants. They have all these different plants on them. And so, like, my students will be able to go through them, work with partners, work individually, whatever they choose, and they will get to go through these and put them on the board where they belong. So they'll stick one there, and they might stick, oh, there's another cactus. So they would stick the cactuses there. I have Christmas trees, and they would just make sure to put the different plants on the correct environment that they belong in. And I think that that's a really cool, fun way to incorporate my students into my literacy center. My goal for my literacy center is to create a fun, unique, creative environment for students to want to learn to read and to stay interested in reading. And showing them something that I love is important to me because I want them to experience the love I have for plants and the love I have for life. And I think that my literacy center could be great and so unique. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed what I had to say. Thank you very much. Bye.